What if your most valuable skills aren't on your resume? In a world accelerating with AI, we are obsessed with data, skills data, credentials, automation. But what gets lost when we reduce people to what's formally documented? Welcome to another episode of TIDES, where we explore transformational innovations driving enterprise strategies. I'm your host, Shveta Malhan, and today we are diving into a powerful question. What makes us uniquely human in an AI world? My guest is someone who's dedicated her career to honoring that human dimension, not just in theory, but in practice. Taruna Goel is a learning strategist and RPL champion whose work has helped thousands of people, especially newcomers and equity seeking professionals, getting recognized for what they already know and can do. Over her 25 plus year career, she's designed competency systems across sectors from trade and early childhood education to IT and digital skills, proving that learning happens in more places than classrooms. Her latest milestone, a pan Canadian certification program for career development practitioners built entirely on the principles of recognition. And since December, over 500 individuals have already been certified. Taruna's message is clear. To build a future-ready workforce, we must start by recognizing the fingerprints of work already done. Taruna, welcome to Tides.
Wow. Thank you for inviting me to your podcast, Shweta, and thank you for that introduction. I've been really looking forward to our conversation today.
Likewise, this is going to be a really fun and engaging conversation for me to learn from you because you bring such wealth of knowledge and experience in especially in how we recognize the past lived experiences. So maybe we start there, Taruna. You recently wrote a piece called Work Fingerprints, the human touch in an AI world. Tell us what inspired that metaphor and what it means to you.
Gosh. Thank you for starting with this question, Shweta. I think work fingerprints, that metaphor really came to me from reflection. I was thinking about AI, as all of us are thinking about AI and the future of work, and specifically in my work in the areas of recognition of prior learning, like you mentioned. And I realized how much of what we do at work can be replicated by machines or other humans, and how much of it is actually uniquely us. And fingerprints to me sort of like were a reminder that no two people contribute in exactly the same way. Even if we have the same job title, we have, our backgrounds, our previous experiences, our learning and our context, they all sort of shape how we approach that same work. And that's what I wanted to highlight in my article. In this AI driven world, if I may say so, our human fingerprints, like they still matter. And I know that my clients value my work fingerprints and things that I bring to the table in my work with sectors and industries, because that's kind of uniquely me. But when I talk about fingerprints, I must also say that it is something that goes beyond the outputs that you and I generate or how efficient we are sort of in doing the work that we do. I was focusing more on what truly is the human in all of us, our fingerprints reflecting our ways of thinking, our ways of solving problem, the ways we relate to each other, how we make decisions and how we show up at, in complex situations at work, in life. And that's like more tacit or hidden rather than obviously visible.
Yeah, that is so true. And if we look at the world that we live in today with AI in the mix and things are changing and evolving so fast, so quickly. I mean, in fact, some days I feel like I compare it to all the changes that we as, especially employees have had to deal with in the past. But the scope, the size, the scale of this change is unprecedented. In this evolving context of work and our society, why does humanizing matter now more than ever? Like, I love your perspective on we need to personalize things. I want us to kind of paint a picture for our audience to understand that we all knew that, we all are unique. We bring such lived experiences to our work from a variety of not just work context, but variety of lived experiences as well. But why is it important for organizations to recognize it now? And why do we need to humanize it now?
What a great question. Let me take you to an example that I was thinking about around the importance of humanizing. We all sort of recently saw how OpenAI replicated the art style of Studio Ghibli, and which kind of led to this whole debate on the internet around the intersection of technology and human creativity. And I'm sure you saw it. I know I was flooded with AI generated Studio Ghibli style of art on my social media platforms. And in many ways, AI sort of reduced or deduced, depending on which side of the fence you're on, that creative expression to a predefined style. And it made it easily available so that it could be applied to anything. And sure, that expression and style suddenly was, accessible to many, become beyond the reach as it was. But it kind of also brought up many ethical concerns regarding ownership and originality or even authenticity of art and of the creative and the human side of how we relate to art, how we consume art, and how it becomes a part of our life. So AI sort of mimicked the style, and that it did well, but I don't think it could bring the depth of human experience and emotion that truly sort of fill Miyazaki's lifetime of like his artwork that is embedded in such deep meaning and based on his experience. And when all of that internet debate was happening, an old sort of video surfaced around Miyazaki's distaste for AI in the context of art. Now, whether we agree with his perspective or not, I think his response to AI is more relevant now than ever. Like his own art aesthetic became an automated sort of pattern recognition, uh, uh, I don't know, application. So it sort of erased the art and the appreciation of all the years of hard work and dedication that he had put into hand drawn animation. And in this kind of context, where AI and technology, they're accelerating faster than we can imagine. It's faster than what our systems and policies and even our own values can sort of keep up. In that context, I think it's so important that we humanize learning, because learning is sort of deeply personal. It's a human endeavor. And somehow AI generated work starts to feel like a threat to who we are. I think to me, humanizing matters today more than ever because it's about sort of intentionally centering the learners. It's about our intent, it's about our emotion. And while AI is sort of great at recognizing patterns and trends, I feel that it's the humanity in us that actually captures the uniqueness of our lived experience, just like our fingerprints, I suppose.
Yeah, that is so well put, Taruna. And if we look at it from learning perspective and the history of learning, how organizations see typical traditional learning and development, we had LMSs, we have then came XAPI where we could track data around learner behavior. We learned how to package and curate content to deliver to individuals. So there's a lot from a learning perspective that we can capture as, for lack of better term, the learning footprint of an employee. But when do we know, if we look at the humanizing angle, when do we know that the system has become too data centric and there's a risk of losing that human element from a learning perspective?
Hmm. Now that's a really good question. I think every time we sort of turn people into metrics, number of courses completed, the skills that are matched, or what is their test score, what have they achieved in terms of those aspects, we are kind of risking overlooking their lived experience, their cultural intelligence, or their instinct or learning that kind of happens in those messy, beautiful, in between sort of systems of these formal systems. So every time we sort of lose the story behind the statistics, I would say that we have become sort of very data driven. In my view, I sort of see it as a reductionist view. We, I mean, we build systems that reward what's easy to measure. Now, does that truly matter what we are measuring? That's a question, sort of what I ask. And like in my work of recognition of prior learning, the learning doesn't show up on a transcript. The learning doesn't show up on a resume, but it doesn't mean that the learning did not happen. So for people like newcomers or people who are looking to change their careers or people who have indigenous knowledge, they have deep expertise. But if we rely only on data based systems, so then I kind of feel that it's not enough. It's not a big enough lens to look at people. And in some ways it can also sort of build biases, because you and I know that algorithms are based on data sets, and sometimes these data sets are themselves sort of replicating the systemic inequalities. They are, in many ways, they reward what we are familiar with, what is easy to measure, over diversity or what's messy. So when we stop seeing people for who they are, I think that's when things have become too data driven. Yeah.
That is such a good point. And I just wanted to also double down on the fact that we are not saying that do not have data in the equation. But what we are saying is don't have only data in the equation, right? Like if we have ways of quantifying learner behavior and what learning has happened, what new skills have been developed, let's do continue to capture that data, because there are decisions and choices on the flip side that have to be made around where do I invest my money in reskilling people? Who should I reskill? What has been the impact of my investment on L&D programs? I'm just naming a few decisions that have to be made. And if we are not capturing the data to measure, we wouldn't be able to make right choices and decisions, because every organization has limited resources and funds, and we need to have enough data to help us make those wise choices. But to your point, we can't rely solely on that. There is so much learning that is happening through lived experiences, through work experiences. So my question is, how do we capture that learning? Like, how do we recognize that informal learning, for lack of better term, or tacit learning that we haven't been able to capture so far?
Now, like if I look at traditional sort of talent management systems, I feel that they do a great job of capturing learning that is sort of bound within titles or credentials or formal pathways, but they often sort of overlook what is a part of our lived experience or the work-based learning that people accumulate over the years. I was moderating plenary discussion in a conference last year, and this was a discussion of sort of successful RPL graduates. They were across various sectors, and on paper each one of them was certified in their field of choice. All of them had gone through an RPL program where their learning was recognized. But what was unique about each of them was that their individual journey in getting there was very different. And I think a traditional sort of talent management system would not be able to see through all of that resilience or adaptability or how they navigated the complexity in their own individual sectors. That kind of learning is difficult to surface in sort of these traditional talent management systems. But not to say that the AI tools cannot complement recognition of this prior learning, but it can't replace, because it involves a more nuanced sort of understanding of what recognition looks like. I think it's important that we also talk about the fact that recognition is, even though it's a very deeply humanizing practice, it is a very structured process. So there are specific steps involved in recognizing prior learning. It is intentional. The idea is to help people know their own skills and be able to document them and assess them and validate those skills that people have sort of gained through learning and experience. So it's a lot about, I see it as a lot about exploring a person's story, their experience, their challenges, and then mapping those learning against competencies and assessing what they know, what they can do. And finally, sort of co-creating a path forward, whether it's recognition or if they need further training or if they need sort of a mentorship. So recognition is less about testing, it's more about sort of uncovering what people already know. And traditional systems sort of focus more on checking boxes, so instead of patterns, we're looking for patterns, but yes, patterns, but also depth and applied wisdom.
So I also wanted to clarify for our audience, when we are talking about recognition of a prior learning, are we looking at it only in the context of learning alone, like what courses to put together, what development plan, or are we looking at recognition of prior learning, which is RPL, recognition of prior learning is equal to recognition of the skill set or the full competency suite that an individual brings to the table. Now, that becomes the starting point for an organization. What does Taruna bring to the table, or what does Shweta bring to the table? There is a lot of data that AI can help us mine. I can throw my resume in one of the Gen AI models and it'll spit out, here are the skills that I've parsed based on your resume. Then I can connect those resumes to ONET, or I can connect it to SFI or any of these competency frameworks out there. So it can help me understand where I sit on the equation. But then I can also build an interface where if AI parses the skills and an organization has data about, these are the projects that Shweta has worked on in the organization. Here are the clients that she's engaged in. Here's the number of hours she's put across each skill. And if Shweta is on project based work in the organization, as soon as she finishes a piece of project, we can push out a quick survey to all the people that Shweta worked with, applying those core skills, and they can rate my skills to say, yes, in this context, Shweta's application of skill is high or low, because there's a lot of contextuality to this equation as well. It's not like if I have a skill in consulting at high, it will be high in every context. It might be really high in healthcare, but not so much in manufacturing, right? So I know I'm very long winded, but basically it'll be great if we can kind of get into the nuances of what RPL looks like. How do we go about it? And how can we use AI? Because is it a manual process today? If it is manual, then there's going to be very low adoption in work context. So if it is manual today, we've established in our conversation today that it's needed, because otherwise it's very myopic data set based on which you're making decisions. If it is needed, the current state is very manual. Can we have AI bump up the manual aspects so that it can take us to a level where, again, 80% is done through AI, but then it gets us to a point where now we can engage humans to make better informed choices? Can we get into that aspect of this conversation?
Absolutely.
Maybe we can start with defining what RPL looks like. And then if you could give an example of where you've seen it in action so we can all relate to it in a deeper way.
Yeah, let's do that. So let's look at defining recognition of prior learning. RPL is a formal, structured process that is actually used to document, review, assess, and evaluate prior learning. And I constantly say prior learning and not experience, because two people may have the same experience but may not have learned the same things. So it's really about giving credit for the learnings that you've had, your knowledge and competencies that you've gained outside of the traditional sort of classroom settings. So this includes all the learning from your voluntary work, whether in your current role or in the community settings. It includes all your informal and non-formal training. It includes your life experiences. It includes things like military service, for example. And the core purpose of recognition of prior learning is to enable people to find opportunities to access either further education or certification or licensing without sort of duplicating learning that they already have. So they gain formal recognition for what they already know and do, which basically helps to reduce the training times or pathways for either upskilling or career change or employment. And in some of the work that I do, recognition of prior learning also sorts of bridges into more regulated occupations. So, especially for, let's say, international trained professionals. So why don't I give you an example of one of my projects where I worked on a recognition of prior learning experience pathway for tire and maintenance technicians here in Canada. So this was for the automotive sector in Nova Scotia. And this candidate, English was his fourth language, and he applied to be certified as a tire and maintenance technician through an RPL program that we had built. And he had years of experience in his home country, and converting that to a formal credential in Canada using the regulated pathway was not only financially challenging for him, but it was actually logistically out of reach. So through the RPL program that we designed, he was required to take a little bit of foundational training, which was actually online and facilitated through the sector association. And then he had to pass a short knowledge exam, which kind of focused on the key knowledge components of the competency that the sector was looking to assess. And then, most importantly, he completed a practical hands on assessment. And it was during this practical hands on assessment that his knowledge, his competencies, and his learnings and his work fingerprints sort of truly emerged. Throughout the practical assessment, he was calm and he was precise and he was very deeply skilled. So not just kind of checking boxes, but kind of demonstrating that quiet, confident competence that only comes from years of doing this work and likely probably mentoring others. And his assessors were quite impressed, not just with his technical accuracy, but his skills told his story. And that sort of sets a powerful reminder for what formal systems sometimes they miss, until someone takes the time to really see. And recognition of prior learning is that philosophy, that mindset, that approach that allows us to see that whole person.
It's so well explained, Taruna. And I'm curious about another question now based on what you said. You mentioned assessors in this equation. Who are the assessors? Like, are they third-party assessors who live outside the organization, or is it people in the organization? Could you share some light on that?
That's a great question. So assessors are actually experts in that particular sector or occupation who are sometimes they can be a part of the organization. In the work that I do, because we work with industry sectors, they are part of the industry, not necessarily part of the sector association or the industry association. And RPL assessors and advisors, they play a critical sort of role in the recognition process because they are trained to look for competence. They are trained to uncover the person behind the resume. And these assessors and advisors, they focus on coaching conversations that they can have with people. So not just about technical skill checking, which is a big part of recognition of prior learning. Don't get me wrong, it's not just listening to stories and having conversations. They are real competency standards that people are assessed against. But a big part of helping them get there is to have these initial conversations in an RPL advisory role and enable them to understand what those competency standards are and help them create their portfolio of work, effective submissions that highlight their competencies. So assessors are usually selected, handpicked. There's a specific criteria that each industry sector or organization has for who gets to become an assessor, but usually takes years of experience and also significant training for them to participate in a recognition of prior learning program.
Fascinating. So is it safe then to assume that RPL methodology can apply in all industries, or is it like it's more applicable in certain industries? I'm just trying to understand, can we apply this methodology in knowledge work or professional services space? And have you had examples of organizations applying it in that space?
Absolutely. It can be applied anywhere and everywhere. So I worked across a range of sectors from early childhood educators to automotive and tire technicians, corrosion specialists, as career development practitioners whose whole work is knowledge-based work, and hairstylists and crane operators. So there's a whole range of sectors that RPL can apply to. So more than a strategy, I think of it as a philosophy or a mindset. So it's not a one particular tool. It's a way of thinking. It's a way that involves mentoring, coaching, advising, and deep listening. And very important, it relies on specific competencies and standards. It relies on collecting evidence and reviewing somebody's learning and experience based on those standards. It involves sort of building multiple means of expression and assessment. So written work, portfolios, written exams, scenario-based interviews, oral stories, and practical assessments. All of these are components of an RPL method, all of which need both tools and technology as well as human judgment and empathy.
And who typically does it in the organization, or where does this piece of work sit in the organization? Is it HR? Is it L&D? Like, where I haven't experienced it in the same way that you're explaining it. So I'm really curious to unpack and understand, where does this capability live?
I think it should essentially live in every operation of the business. So, because recognition is, because I think of it as a philosophy or a mindset, I don't think of it as a tool. So, we all need to start recognizing our own skills and competencies and that of others, whether we are in HR, L&D, business, ops, IT, wherever we are. Because I work with industries and sectors, it tends to sit with industry associations. So they are sort of the holders of the standard. In an organization or enterprise context, I would say L&D is probably the holder of the learning and performance standard. So that's where it might sit as centralizing function. But its application actually starts and permeates all the functions. For example, when an HR team sort of produces a job description, what are they really asking for the from the candidates who want to apply? Are they asking for degrees, or are they asking for competencies and skills that matter? Because a formal recognition only through degrees kind of is a limiting view of recruitment and talent development. So once they make their way into the organization and now they're in the hands of L&D in terms of onboarding and other learning interventions, is the L&D function asking, hey, what do they already know, so that I don't have to train them on these things again? And the focus then has to be on transferable skills. So the same skills and competencies may not be called the same in your organization versus another organization. So it involves a little bit of letting go of our egos and our fixation with certain terms and terminologies, and staying open and curious to the possibilities that that person that's coming in is already coming in with skills that matter and are important to us. We just have to figure out what those skills are.
Yeah. And in the past, because you've been doing this for quite some time and you have implemented this methodology in a variety of work scenarios, what are typical challenges that an organization can anticipate when they're thinking of applying the RPL methodology or framework or mindset in their work context?
That's a great question. I think one of the important things that I've noticed is that organizations need to start off thinking about what is knowledge, which is valuable, and whose knowledge counts in the system. And because we have to quantify certain competencies, what are the other competencies that we are ignoring? And the tools that we are using in our organization, are they actually surfacing these kind of competencies and potential, or are they screening it out? So are we allowing people in, or are we weeding them out? Are our tools and systems equitable? Are they transparent? Do they kind of give room for context? So all of these are like tough questions for them, and it also makes them think about, how do we make room for all of this complexity? So all our HR system, talent management systems, even business operations, we expect everything to sort of fall into these neat little boxes, because it allows us to simplify and make decisions and come up with patterns and trends. But people don't come in these neat little boxes. We are complex. Our learning is complex. We learn in non-linear sort of ways, from family, from community, from our mentors, and even from crises. So
Yeah.
our systems and our assessments need to sort of make room for that complexity. And that's a big challenge for teams and people that are sort of approaching, RPL for the first time, or trying to look at recognition before sort of retraining. And
Hmm.
what can really help them is to focus on human centered approaches. Like, let me make it more concrete. When we look at RPL assessment tools, for example, and if organizations are thinking about how do we use tools that help recognize this prior learning, think of how to make those tools human centered. And what makes things human centered is to start with humility and curiosity. So basically, be okay with proven wrong. Be okay with saying that I don't know anything, including the tool. So the tool should know that it doesn't know everything about that person. For example, in an RPL context, a human centered sort of tool will allow people to respond in more than one ways about how they demonstrate their competence. So it can allow them, for example, in some of the RPL projects, people can submit hands-on demos of their practical work. People can actually submit oral narrative storytelling portfolios instead of written portfolios. Or instead of interviews, they can have competency conversations. And so it's built around sort of dignity and psychological safety, seeing that whole person that we just spoke about earlier, not just kind of their digital trail or their test scores.
Yeah, yeah. And are there tools that exist to solve for this today?
There are some tools that exist, but not too many. I think the RPL world is just about starting to catch up on tools that kind of can help reduce this friction, provide more access, but it's still quite human forward, the entire practice of recognition of prior learning. But tools can make a huge difference. For example, if tools are able to sort of reflect the diversity of learning and doing, if they can allow for people to have multiple ways of expressing their competence, and even simplifying things like, okay, here's my resume, these are the key skills, and here are the competency standards for this industry or this organization, or here's this organization skill dictionary. How well do I map in terms of what I already know and what they want? And tools can sort of facilitate this process, make it, at least I won't say frictionless, because human judgment is still required, but it can definitely reduce some of the barriers involved in doing that first initial exercise. So when I work in RPL, and we kind of interface with potential candidates who want to apply for the RPL process, they're very intimidated by this whole process of having to reflect on their previous journeys and then convert all of that reflection into a term or a skill or a competency standard which is defined in a particular way. And that's where sort of human advisors play a role, but it's difficult to scale that system. And I think technology, especially AI driven technology, can enable that scaling of that initial help that candidates need to sort of get into the door. Once they're in the door, then us humans can help resolve the more specific challenges for them. So there's definitely scope for more tools and technology to allow and enable these kind of things.
So I'm curious, Taruna, how would we distinguish? Because a lot of organizations are talking about skills based organization, that we have to understand skills that employees bring to the table and rewire the entire set of processes for an HR department to solve for that.
Hmm.
Like skills should be the building blocks that we use to set up the new HR of the future.
Hmm.
How are skills and RPL connected or disconnected? How are they similar or dissimilar?
They're absolutely connected. And I think some of it is terminology. What I'm calling competencies, somebody else might call it skills. So essentially, competencies are made of knowledge, attitudes, and skills, all of these three components. And
Yeah.
so skills is sort of a buzzword these days. I'm more of a competency nerd and a purist. So I tend to use the word competencies, but they're completely connected, because in the absence of standards and competencies, it's difficult to sort of even ask people to begin their reflection journey and think about what do they already know. In terms of recognition, the process, it starts, we usually ask the question, let's start with what you know. We usually work with the philosophy that we are assuming that you're competent, and now we will try and uncover that competence and map it to the standards that are important for this industry, this organization, this enterprise, this government, this country. So skills and competencies are, I would say, the foundational pillars of recognition of prior learning.
So, if an organization wants to bring in recognition of prior learning approach so that they have a more holistic picture of not just what the current state of an employee looks like as a starting point, so that we can invest in their learning growth, reskilling, where should they start? Like, maybe let me backtrack. Organization does not have a recognition of prior learning methodology or a framework in place. So for them to start, what does the current state look like? How are organizations addressing it today, right now? And I'm not getting into the AI piece. I'm just looking at how are they doing it right now, today, without, because like you said, our current HRIS or talent systems might not be best suited to help an organization bring this RPL into their fold.
It's a great question, Shweta. It's so thoughtful as well. I think too often organizations sort of jump straight into reskilling initiatives without asking what do our people already know. And where they can perhaps start is to begin with the recognition first mindset, which sort of honors existing competence. And this is not just like a philosophical point of view. Recognizing people's prior learning and skills actually prevents waste. It helps organizations save their time, money, and builds morale. For someone who's actually done the work but has never been seen by the system or felt validated, this sort of recognition and acknowledgement, it can actually be much more empowering than checking off the completion of a training module in the LMS. And somehow I always also think about the word reskilling. It's like we think that people are software that kind of need an update, but reskilling is not a simple thing. It's deeply emotional, it's personal. It touches our identity and self-worth. It talks about our sense of belonging with the organization every time we are considered unfit for the role, or if we don't qualify for something, or if we don't meet the credential, and we are asked to let go of what we've always known and what has worked for us and try and find new ways. So instead of sort of be quick to upskill, I would say take a pause and think of the step of recognizing what's already there. Before launching a new training module, ask, what does this person already know? How do I know that? And I think skilling or upskilling or recognizing existing skills, it's more than just a pathway to increase work performance or award qualifications or give credentials. It in fact is life changing. My experience in recognition of prior learning tells me that people feel very seen and validated and emotional, and sometimes quite overwhelmed, that they also start bursting into tears. And it's not because that the process was overwhelming. What was overwhelming for them was that somebody actually asked them the right questions that helped their skills come to the surface, and they felt seen for the first time. And they usually say things like, I didn't know this was valued, or I didn't know that other people could see this, or I didn't know that I mattered. So being recognized and its impact and influence sort of goes beyond just that individual whose learning is recognized. It really does have the power to change communities or industries or enterprises and even countries. And when this kind of prior learning is surfaced in the right way, it can actually dramatically shorten the path to talent development. It not only boosts confidence, it actually impacts labor shortage issues and helps close those kind of equity gaps that we see across sectors. So recognize before you retrain is sort of my motto for enterprises.
That's right. Another way we can put it is that do a current state assessment of what do your people bring to the table beyond the current job title that they have
Well
in
said.
your organization, because we have such lived experiences beyond the current job title. And most organizations do not have the holistic view of what the talent brings as skills, as competencies, as lived experiences that can be leveraged, especially in today's context, because just like AI's, like AI's impact is also multidimensional. It's not just that we are using AI to automate, but it influences how businesses are run. Like it's fundamentally, in some cases, reshaping the business models of the organization. And there is no end state defined to this yet. We don't know that just implement salesforce.com and you're set, and then we are just updating, tweaking the current platform that we implemented. AI is not like that. It might give us a starting point, but we don't know how far it's going to go. So it's constant evolution that we have to get into. So understanding the human dynamic based on what I'm hearing from you, and recognizing what people bring to the table beyond the job title will help organizations also be more effective in leveraging the talent, the holistic talent that they have to solve for problems that they don't know whether those problems are current problems right now. So I love that perspective, Taruna, because yes, definitely from the individual perspective, I will feel more valued. I will feel recognized. And if I'm valued and I'm recognized and I'm engaged in the organization in a meaningful way, my engagement will be higher. If my engagement is higher, my productivity and performance is going to be impacted in a positive way as well. We can also look at the same, like the need for RPL from other stakeholders lens as well. Like if you look at it from an HR lens, having a holistic view of their talent helps them make informed choices and decisions when it comes to workforce planning, and when it comes to workforce development, when it comes to things like succession planning. All of the areas that HR is invested in can be better informed if they understand not just, like the macro picture of the talent, but can zoom into one individual in the organization and make much more better informed choice and decision. So that's one stakeholder. The other stakeholder is the business leaders. Most of the time it is the business who's struggling with, who do I get to solve for this kind of problem, because this is a new problem that I didn't have in the past. Gone are the days where you have a team and you have a set of work that the team does, and that, for next 6 years, that's the only work that the team is going to do. I don't think that reality would apply in today's context. So even the team leaders or people managers or people who are curating a team on the business side would also benefit a lot if they can understand the full talent landscape, so that they can pull the right person for the right job at the right time, because they understand humans at individual level.
Absolutely. I think, I mean, and kudos to the points that you made about, industry sort of evolving constantly and technologies reshaping how we work. So things like adaptability, they're not just a nice to have, it's actually essential. And recognizing that people learn all the time, mostly outside of formal education. I was in a conference the other day and the facilitator opened with this question: what is the most impactful learning experience that you've had as an adult? And then we all sort of took a minute to think about that. And then she asked, was it in a classroom? So guess what? The answer was no, because a lot of significant learning experiences happen outside of the classroom. You and I both, we are immigrants to this country. I'm sure that you did not go through any course around how to build a new life in Canada. And we don't have any credential that says that, we are a successful immigrant. But we've sort of learned through that entire journey, through all those challenges, of finding our community, finding suitable employment experience, and raising our children, and having our family here. So all of that lived experience is important, not only to us, but also to business, because it can actually help leverage the skills and the knowledge that the organization already has, and open doors to access to new roles, to new opportunities, to sort of greater mobility within the organization. And more organizations, I would say, are sort of coming to realize that people have or already have what it takes. They just don't have their capabilities sort of formally recognized yet. And in many ways, sort of RPL helps bridge that gap. And if I can kind of connect it back to the fingerprints metaphor, AI sort of can help you map the skills, create competency dictionaries, but it can't help you make meaning out of them. And that's the role of business leaders. You can use, like, I like to use this analogy of AI, as a magnifying glass, but let it not be your eye,
Yeah.
let it reveal possibilities, but don't let it override the judgment that's uniquely human. And in doing so, don't assume that whatever can be measured easily is worth measuring, or whatever can be measured in a standardized way is the only thing that matters. And don't get me wrong, I know the importance of sort of building a system for uniformity, because it allows us to predict. It builds predictability, it builds consistency, it builds efficiency. But at the cost of what? Those are the questions that we need to ask. Sometimes efficiency comes at the cost of lack of equity. So I'm a sort of a pragmatist, a humanist when it comes to AI. I'm not a pessimist. I'm not an optimist. But I know that I wouldn't want to let AI sort of dictate my learning strategy. I would let it support sort of those human-centered practices, gather evidence, gather patterns, gather spot trends, but always sort of have the human in the loop for judgment and dialogue and recognition.
Yeah, I love that. I love that because, again, like we started, we're not saying that we have to choose either or. It's striking the right balance of technology and human in the loop so that we end up making more informed choices and decisions. Like if you look at no technology in the mix, there's a risk on that side too. Like we cannot make fully informed decisions if we don't have the right information and data at our fingertips. And the other side is we can't just put an agent in the mix saying just make sense of all the human data that you can possibly connect to and then come up with a learning path or a learning recommendation. And where do you see AI, if we specifically look at AI as a technology that can do the first mile work, let's put it like that, like first mile, middle mile, AI or technology can do, but the last mile is still with humans. Where do you see, because you're so close to this methodology, where do you see AI can do the heavy lifting that makes the last mile work much more valuable for humans to play in that space with?
That's a great question. And I've been thinking about it especially specifically from the context of recognition of prior learning, because I don't know of too many AI driven tools in RPL practices, but I think AI definitely, we know that AI can do sort of a remarkable job at adapting content delivery based on the learning needs and based on performance data. Of course, recognition gets more complex than that because it requires, like you said, context and meaning making and sometimes even cultural and situational awareness. But AI automation sort of suggestions based on data or personalization through optimization, that all still works in recognition of prior learning. As the first few phases in RPL are essentially about helping candidates document what they know and making them easier to understand what the occupational standards are. So giving them the confidence to understand the vocabulary of that occupation or that job profile. And I think AI can do a good job at sort of helping them understand those terms and terminology. So let's say an AI tool has this knowledge bank that it refers to answer specific questions that candidates have about that competency standards document. Usually competency standards document for the work that I do are like 100 pager. They have great thumb value, but it's difficult and very challenging for most people to understand those. And sometimes English is a challenge, especially for new immigrants to the country or for people who are trying to kind of shift their careers. They're used to understanding competency in a language that they've heard in their occupation. And now they are trying to move their career into some other occupation and it's just called something else. So AI can sort of help bridge these gaps for sure. But I think AI can also help RPL advisors and assessors at creating the right kind of rubrics around assessment of these competencies. What is the data that actually matters? Or when we are building written exams or practical assessments, are we really testing the competencies or are we testing for English language?
Yeah.
Sometimes these kind of basic gaps happen because of human biases. Like if you ask a subject matter expert to write a written exam for an occupation, they will write more questions on the area that they love to talk about rather than the entire length and breadth of that occupation. And that's where we need instructional designers to sort of focus that, hey, this exam is made of these 10 competencies. We need enough questions that address all the competencies. We need questions at all Bloom's level of taxonomy so that we are able to sort of create a good baseline. And AI can actually support the development of all of these assessment tools and evidence collecting mechanisms, as long as the human is always in the loop.
Yeah. No, I love that. I think just imagine all the areas that you highlighted. If AI can do the heavy lifting, it frees up so much time and capacity for assessors, for evaluators, for instructional designers to actually focus on creating more valuable offering to their audience versus just going through collecting data, making sense of that data or information. Like even if somebody as a user to RPL is submitting their information against those competencies and skills, somebody has to make sense of all that information.
Absolutely.
If that sense making to a degree is done by AI, then final last mile of making decisions, making choices can be with the human. So it really frees up the space and capacity for other people to add value to the context, which makes the adoption of RPL much more easier for organization. Then it doesn't sound like, oh my goodness, I have like 5,000 employees. If I have to do this assessment on all 5,000 employees, how will I go about it in a manual fashion, right?
And I think sometimes we get intimidated by the sheer number. But if we start to focus on people doing their own self assessments, recognizing their own skills instead of it being led by the HR or L&D or the business, helping people develop their own skills to learn about themselves. And in some of the RPL projects and programs that I've done, so there are a few projects that we've done for the digital technology sector in Nova Scotia. And the RPL programs and projects that we did are all focused on self-assessment. So no employer or organization or somebody else, third party who doesn't know about you, tells you to do it. You sort of self-enroll in that process and say, okay, what are my competencies in this area? Do I know enough? What kind of questions are being asked? And have I done this before or have I not? And it sort of shares a report with them saying, okay, for this occupation, you already have like 55% of the competencies. And these are the areas where you need to sort of train yourself or grow. And here are some links to self-paced learning that you can go and look at to sort of build those competencies and then get some internship experience or work voluntary experience in those areas. So it can actually start as small as self-assessment, and which is why I keep saying RPL is a mindset or a philosophy, not like a tool. Because the minute we kind of think of it as a tool, then we start to think of scaling, uniformity, consistency, and all those big words that are important for us and the business. But starting low and starting small is where I would recommend everybody to go.
Is there a website that people can enroll to do this assessment, recognition of prior learning?
So there are a few, particularly for this client, yes, there are a few websites and links that I can share with you after our recording and
drop it in the
yes,
description of the video.
yes.
That'll be fantastic. So, because it's a mindset, in the last segment, let's talk about how learning leaders can uh, can start adopting a recognition first mindset. What would you recommend as one simple step for an HR team decision maker or a learning team decision maker to take that can help them adopt this recognition first mindset?
So I'm gonna share something that I was kind of thinking about the other day, and it's a long-winded answer to your question, but I wanted to connect this thing. We've all heard this word at the beginning or the end of a yoga class here in North America, but you are more familiar with it. Namaste.
Yeah.
And namaste is generally sort of assumed to be a greeting, but it actually means something much deeper. It means I bow to the divine in you. So that's what it really means. So at its core, namaste sort of acknowledges that each person is equal and worthy of respect because they sort of hold within themselves something that's of value, something that's worth honoring, their wisdom, their experience, their competence. So if I had to kind of say something to HR leaders, business leaders, I would say think of RPL as a namaste. Think of RPL as a way to see learners beyond their formal credentials and recognize their experiential learning. See people as a whole, not as someone that needs to be fixed or trained or upskilled or sort of legitimized before they count. So that really is truly a very small task of sort of shifting a mindset. And I think don't lose sight of the fingerprints in your workforce. So AI can actually help map skills, even document skills. Like AI can help organizations start to document what skills are important for them, create their skill dictionaries or competency standards, but allow that human intervention to make meaning out of all of it. That's our role as human beings, is to use AI as a way to augment our own intelligence, not to replace it. Focusing on revealing the possibilities that lie and the potential that kind of lies in the human workforce by doubling down on human judgment. So the more AI sort of scales efficiency, I want HR and business leaders to scale their humanity in the practice of what they do.
Love it. So well said, Taruna. That was great. Thank you. What a nice note to wrap up our conversation on. So, thank you for the depth and clarity and humanity that you brought to this conversation. You reminded us that transformation isn't just about new technologies, it's about new ways of seeing the people behind the work. And for our listeners, If you're building learning systems, rethinking talent pipelines, or trying to make AI more human centered, this is your call to recognize before you retrain. Start by asking, what are we missing? Whose learning aren't we seeing? And if this episode resonated, please share it with someone shaping the future of learning. And until next time, stay bold, stay human, and keep riding the tide.
Thank you, Shveta, and namaste to you.
Namaste.